Before we dive into the hottest news topics, if you love Flash Drive, make sure you're following us on Spotify and Apple to know as soon as any new content drops.
Here, where Queen Elizabeth was married and crowned, we gather from across the nation to remember her long life of selfless service and ensure confidence to commit her to the mercy of God, our Maker and Redeemer.
After a global outpouring of grief and respect, Queen Elizabeth II has finally been laid to rest inside Windsor Castle. Plus,
but having inflation high for a long period of time will mean higher interest rates and fewer jobs. And that will hurt a lot more.
After months of copping it over rising interest rates, the Reserve Bank fights back. And
they've taken more territory in the past week than Russia has since April.
Ukraine launches a stunning fight back against the Russians. I'm James Law and this is Flash Drive, and I'm happy to welcome back news.com.au Deputy Editor Liz Burke. Thank you for coming back again.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
And for those who are watching instead of listening, we're in the fancy News Corp podcast room today.
Yeah.
It's pretty good.
Welcome to my crib.
Right? This is just how Liz rolls. Liz, before we dive into the news, we know generally, but what have people been lapping up on news.com.au over the past week?
It's been royal. Honestly, it's like readers just can't get enough of all of the different angles. But for us, I think it was initially, after the shock or the surprise of the Queen dying. It then went to, what does this mean for us? What are the public holidays? The money going to change? Things like that. And then since then, it's been all about, Harry and Meghan, the kind of the little sort of royal sideshows that have been going alongside the the commemorations and the memorials and everything. That's just still going.
It'll be interesting to see how long people are interested in it for, because it's been 10 days of mourning. Now we've had the funeral. I suspect maybe interest will start to drop off, but maybe not.
I think so, but there is sort of more to come, because there's, now it's sort of how do we see Charles, behave as king. He's got a coronation coming up. There's a few other kind of little events coming up, a few changes to be made. And then also there's, the Harry and Meghan factor. They've sort of been welcomed back into the royal fold. Are they going to go back to their regular lives in LA? There's kind of a few questions up in the air, and I think the events of the past 10 days have certainly reignited the interest there.
And plus, King Charles, I'll correct myself, is likely to visit Australia pretty soon, within the next 12 months at least, right? So that'll sort of put him back in focus for us again.
Yeah, and probably I think we're hearing maybe even Prince William and Kate as well. So
that'd be cool.
Yeah, it feels like there's some royal excitement coming up over the next year after the royal sadness that we've experienced.
Well, before we dive into some of the fun stuff, we really should look at the funeral that happened on Monday night Australian time. So, it was a pretty profound event, and for me it sort of showed British pomp, ceremony and organisation at its best. So we had thousands of world leaders inside Westminster Abbey. We had hundreds of thousands lining the streets of London to pay their final respects. And then the thing that we didn't see was the burial, where Queen Elizabeth's coffin was finally joined with her late husband, Philip. That was only the smallest, most close royals who were there for that event. It was quite an event. Liz, what did you make of it?
To me, the things that stood out were really sort of opposite. So there was all of that stuff about, the organisation. It was just so British. I was sitting at home with my husband watching it on the couch, just going, it's really something else, hey? You just don't get this kind of ceremony anywhere else in the world, even down to the dress codes. Gentlemen must wear, I think it was, morning suit or military dress or whatever. What other sort of events have those kind of instructions? Ladies have to wear a black hat. That is just so specific and so British. But for me, there was, you're watching this extraordinary event unfold, and it was such a show, an epic show of royalty, which sounds so obvious to say because of course it was, but it's to me, that's almost the only word for it, because it's beyond wealth, it's beyond celebrity, it's beyond, this massive sense of occasion. You just don't get anything else like that when it's not royalty, when it's not to do with the king or a queen. So there were just kind of flashes that showed that when they kept showing the crown that was atop the coffin, and just those diamonds and rubies and everything just sparkling like crazy, and you're going, that's crown jewels. Like that's why it looks so amazing and so sparkly. And then there were these kind of little side moments where you go, oh, Charles looks really down, doesn't he? And you kind of remember, oh yeah, this is a funeral. His mum died. That's why. That's what this whole thing is all about. So yeah, there were just kind of these really like little contrasting moments. And then, to see the children participating in it was, I think, quite profound, and just one of those little reminders that you go, oh yeah, like that's your great-grandmother's funeral. Like that's quite extraordinary thing to witness.
Yeah, and I was really looking out to see George and Charlotte because
hanging out for their arrival. That was so exciting to see,
wasn't it? And they were very well behaved, and they did all the right things, and they walked where they should, and all that kind of stuff. But there were a couple of little things that came out that I took note of. So one was this picture that I think the AFP got of Charlotte crying outside after the funeral. We don't know a lot about like what the context of that was, but it was sort of just a picture of her in tears and Kate comforting her. That was kind of one of the moments for me.
Yeah, it's so beautiful. You're like, oh yeah, this is a child and a mother. This is a family. Was she crying about, having lost her great-grandmother? Was she, she's a 7-year-old. She could be crying about absolutely anything. Did she have
might have just been tired.
Yeah, was she tired? Did like a little stone get in her shoe or something? But there were just kind of those little moments that remind you, oh yeah, these are real people.
And then the other thing that I love when they get the lip readers involved.
Yes.
And so there was this little moment. So Charlotte is known as being sassy. Somehow we know that. But where I believe what the lip readers caught was her speaking to George and it's telling him, you must bow when the coffin goes past. I thought that was so cute.
Yeah. And he kind of checks himself and he's like, oh yeah, you're right.
He's like, I know.
Yeah. But I saw, I think that kind of made me think of, I saw a headline from one of the UK papers that said, at this event, Prince George, proved himself as a future king. But, I think it was Charlotte that stole the show. She's got it. She's got like all of those queen features down.
It's like another Princess Margaret, right?
Yeah, exactly.
She's like, it should be me.
Exactly. Yeah, so it was great to see a lot of the kids participating. It obviously, must have been a bit tough for them, but they weren't the only ones to get upset, hey?
Yeah, I noticed something really interesting from, this is sort of like inside journalism that people wouldn't normally see. So the broadcast of the funeral went out to everyone live and it sort of came from the BBC, and I think there was another service, and they were largely the ones that was syndicated across all the different networks. But we were kind of restricted on Flash about what we could show other than the live broadcast. We couldn't kind of clip it up and give you little moments straight away until it had been kind of cleared in the hours after the funeral. And then we got some really interesting advice that I thought like the listeners might be intrigued about from Reuters. So Reuters is one of the news wires that distributes a lot of this raw footage and news to us and other news outlets across the world. And in the hours after the funeral, they sort of said, yep, go ahead and you can use all the content, but there's some things that we cannot allow you to reuse. And I'll just read from this email some of the stuff that they didn't want us to reuse. Prince George wiping his nose and eyes at 11:48. A shot of Princess Eugenie and Zara Tindall wiping their eyes with their hands and tissues while standing and singing. There was also the moment where Princess Beatrice and Eugenie walked from their seats after the funeral.
Oh, yeah.
They said, don't reuse that.
No way.
Shots of Earl and Countess of Wessex upset.
Oh,
Who are
that's
they?
so interesting. That's Sophie.
Sophie and Andrew.
And Andrew, yes.
So
the other brother.
Yeah, and I mean, this is what we're talking about like the royal family's stranglehold on its image.
Yeah.
I think that they didn't want some of that stuff being...
So I wonder if that directive comes from the palace, or if the networks just kind of know, oh no, we can't show this stuff. We'll get in trouble if we show this stuff.
My guess is it would come from the palace, and that would be like part of the agreement is you can show all this, but we want a bit of control on what is rebroadcast forever.
They want to review the tape.
Wow,
isn't that fascinating?
That
So
interesting.
you can pick those moments if you're watching it live. You can take a little screenshot, but a news organisation can't focus on that and keep replaying the moment.
That's right. But, savvy Flash audiences, they can zip back and they can still see it if they want. But just don't tell Reuters or the Palace.
Not to defy the Palace or anything.
Yeah. King Charles might be off with my head.
Oh, no. James Law done for treason.
The other really thing that's caught a lot of attention and garnered a lot of headlines is Prince Harry's treatment. So there's a lot to unpack, but I think one of the main things was around the protocol of what he would wear at the various events. So it began last week where he was told during one of the vigils that he should wear a suit and not his military gear, garb. And then he put out a statement saying, I don't need to wear military garb because I was actually there. I served in Afghanistan. Then it seemed like they changed the rules, made an exception, and he was able to wear the military garb, but not to the funeral where he was in one of these mourning suits.
Yeah, for one event only. It was the vigil where he and the other grandchildren, stood vigil around the Queen's coffin. I was actually so surprised by the level of interest in this issue. We've got 13 million readers on news.com.au. People are going to be interested in all sorts of different things. When you have, comments going on a story, you get all sorts of different angles. But this was one issue that seemed to really sort of not so much unite people, but it seemed like so many people had concerns. There was so much interest in whether he was allowed to wear this military uniform or not at these events. And I guess that's because, that type of service does really mean a lot to a lot of people. It's just been that kind of, that question that comes up again and again and again. Why was he allowed to for this event? Why wasn't he allowed to for this event? We don't really have those answers, but we know that the exception was made and he, seemingly happily took it up. And then after there's been so much discussion about it, he certainly stood out overnight when I was watching him in the funeral, and you're like, oh yeah, it does seem a bit of a shame that he, can't be dressed up and making a big deal of his service that he's clearly very proud of. Yeah. But I kind of buy his statement as well that he, doesn't feel the need to make that show too.
And there was also that picture where all of the royals who were in their military gear giving a salute and him not being able to because that would be against protocol.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and you mentioned the interest this has got on news.com.au. What are the commenters saying? Like, are they like, this is disgusting? What are they kind of saying?
To be honest, it's mainly just interest. It's mainly just why is this happening? And it's that it's part of those traditions that we were talking about that you kind of don't get at any other event. So men are permitted to wear or encouraged to wear a military uniform if they're in active service, or royals who have served in the military previously. So there were some, you would have noticed, some people in the crowds who were wearing their uniforms and medals as well. That was only if they are, currently working military figures. But yeah, and so Harry, is not currently serving as a soldier, is not currently in the military, but being a working royal, he would have been allowed to do that. And of course, that kind of brings us back to all of the controversy around Megxit and he and Meghan leaving the royal family, and then this kind of reunion that we've seen over the past week. But yeah, I think there was certainly also a lot of reaction about the salute. There was the question about why, trying to understand why he wasn't able to do it. But then I think a bit of an outpouring of sympathy for him as well, because he'd want to pay his grandmother that respect.
Certainly, yeah. And there's also been a lot made of. So Harry was seated in the second row, not the front row during the funeral. People are reading into that. The other thing was there was a story that came out of the Daily Telegraph in London about Charles urging the Parliament to make some changes to laws. So if he's ill or overseas when an official engagement or something official needs to be done by the king, there's sort of like a lineup of who the next people should be. And at the moment, I think Harry is like sort of the third or fourth adult in line to get the call up.
Yeah.
Should the king be
He's
unavailable.
in the mix.
He's in the mix, right? Charles wants the law changed so that he has pushed way back the order and people like Princess Anne are brought forward. I mean, what do you think about this? So obviously Harry has very famously withdrawn from royal duties, had some very disparaging comments to make about the royal family and the firm as it's known.
Yep.
Do you think it's fair enough that he is being stripped of some of these responsibilities and privileges?
I think it is in the sense that that's sort of what he's asked for. So that's, they actively stepped back. They kind of didn't want to be they didn't want to be as involved with the royal family as they have been. But the question of, pushing them further away, I think it could be a little bit of a misstep for the royal family because we've seen, there's so much love for Harry. There's so much love for Harry and even for Meghan. And I think we've really kind of seen that displayed in the past week, in the past 10 days. Although there's been controversial headlines about their involvement, I think they've, more widely, people have been happy to see them, and particularly Harry, happy to see him back in the mix, happy to see him by the family side. There's certainly a lot of nostalgia around seeing those brothers together, particularly of, how we saw them growing up and the shows of unity that they had to put on, as a pair of brothers, especially when they didn't have their mother around. They're kind of like the symbol of the royal family sort of sticking together that I think a lot of people, a lot of royalists, a lot of royal watchers want to cling on to. So I don't know if for me, it's not a question of whether it's fair. It's more a question of whether it's smart. And for the royal family, which at the end of the day is, a bit of a business, which has a publicity machine attached to it, that's clearly very important to them, to how they operate. Basically everything they do in public is for show, is for cameras, is to communicate with the people of the Commonwealth. I feel like pushing Harry further away is perhaps not the smartest move.
Well, it'll be interesting to see what happens from here. Hopefully this is a kind of bringing them back together. I mean, I, for one, was really sad when I heard about just how far estranged William and Harry had become.
Yeah.
Because there's one thing to be cranky at your dad, but when they were...
It's devastating. It's devastating, especially since we've seen them so close since they were such little boys.
Yeah, Diana would want them to be mates.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We just want them to hang out. We want them to have a beer together. That's the great thing about, growing up and being able to kind of hang out with your siblings or with your parents, as mates. But yeah, I would like to have that for them.
Hopefully this tragic event brings them back together.
Yeah, some light.
Remember, Flash Drivers, if you're loving the podcast, let us know. Subscribe and leave 5-star reviews. Tell your friends, tell your enemies. Everyone needs to be across the news of the week. Liz, let's move on from the Queen now, just briefly, to discuss something else that I thought was really interesting this week. Reserve Bank Governor Phil Lowe was grilled before Parliament on Friday after months of pretty heavy criticism over consecutive interest rate rises. Mr. Lowe's been copping it after he indicated, I think last year and even earlier this year, that the central bank would not raise interest rates until at least 2024.
Our central scenario continues to be that the condition for a rise in the cash rate will not be met until 2024.
That obviously changed when the RBA raised the official cash rate 5 times in a row, adding significantly to average Aussies' mortgage repayments, you and me included.
Yeah, great.
Isn't it good? So he went before an economics committee in Canberra on Friday, and it's fair to say he was punching back against some of this relentless criticism he's received.
Previously, the RBA had forecast that the damaging effects of the pandemic on our economy would be long-lasting, and as a result, inflation would stay low. And on that basis, we had expected that interest rates would remain low for some years. I'm frequently reminded that many people interpreted our previous communication as a promise or as a commitment that interest rates would not increase until 2024. This was despite our statements on interest rates always being conditional on the state of the economy, and this conditionality often got lost in the messaging. So we're currently working through the implications of this for our future approach to forward guidance and for communication more generally.
So you've been right across all this. What did he have to say in his grilling?
Yeah, well, there's a lot of different things that came out of it. I mean, first for us homeowners, the bad news is he said that there would be more interest rates in the year ahead, he thinks, but maybe not as high as those 0.5%, more like 0.25% until they get it to a state that they're happy with. He said that the official cash rate is still too low, though. So for those who have a home loan, get ready to pay even more. But he did kind of take issue with the way that some of this criticism has been directed at him. He said he never promised that interest rates would be kept, held until 2024.
Yeah.
I think that's right. He didn't promise. But anyone who has followed this knows that he gave very, very strong signals to the market, to the economists and homeowners and prospective homeowners that things would not go up for at least another year and a half.
Yeah.
And I understand that things change with the economy, but I feel like he very, very badly got that call wrong. And he was so adamant about it, as I recall.
Yeah.
So I think he is still trying to correct the record on that, but I'm not sure how well he's going. The other thing he had to say is that house prices could fall as much as 10% from their peak. Though he was very clear in his language. He was like, this is not an RBA forecast. This is just you asked me, and this is what I reckon might happen.
This is not a promise.
This
not
is not
a promise.
Exactly. So he's learned his lesson. So I'm not sure whether he stuck the landing, but that was some of what he had to say.
Yeah. He's certainly become quite a controversial figure over the past, I'd say, the past sort of 6 months specifically. Do you think it's fair that he's copping all this criticism?
I do.
Yeah.
I understand that economics is a really tricky game, but they're the sort of people who we turn to try and make sense of this stuff. Yeah. And I think that, as I said, he was very clear repeatedly. I remember there was a National Press Club address that he made where journos were really asking him over and over again about are you sure about this? Inflation is going up. A lot of Aussies are feeling the pinch with cost of living. Surely you've got to raise interest rates higher and sooner than you're indicating. All of the major banks are saying, no, we've got to start addressing this soon. And I remember his statements. They were like, no, we'll wait and see. Let's be really cautious about it. And now they're doing the opposite of that and correcting really quickly.
Yeah, well, of course you remember statements like that, and everyone who's invested would, because this is the kind of advice that people make really serious life and business decisions based on. You're deciding, what do I do with my money? What do I do with my family? What do I do with my home? It's not just like a throwaway comment that you can kind of step back in a year or 6 months' time, which seems to be sort of what he's trying to do a little bit now.
Yeah. And I feel like anyone who even just visited the supermarket in the months before interest rates went up would have known that there's something's off with the economy. Everything's so expensive. Something's got to give. But he seemed to have come to that realization after the masses did.
And if you read the statements that kind of follow each of those rate rise announcements, there always seems to be a little admission in there that's kind of saying, yes, we, not explicitly saying we got it wrong, but sort of pointing in that direction, going, there are things that have been beyond our control. We're making these steps to bring inflation down and to correct the market a little bit. But yeah, it kind of feels like the approach to me is if we make these admissions, then we'll be forgiven a little bit and it will make it all okay. But, when people have kind of been staking their livelihoods on the decisions that are trying to be walked back a little bit now, feels like that's kind of not really enough.
Yeah, that's it. And, I think a lot of people probably oversubscribed when they were getting home loans and stuff based on that advice. Yeah. Maybe they'll think twice before listening to him next time, which is a worry.
Yeah, I feel like there's kind of a lot more self-examination going on now, can we really trust the banks and the financial institutions and things like that? I mean, looking back, there were signs. I mean, no, you shouldn't be trusting those kind of organisations. But,
Yeah, I think
what
so.
can we do?
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, but he was quite defensive as well. He took the opportunity to kind of throw it back in the face of the pollies who were questioning him. What did he have to say there?
Yeah, he did. So, I think he has been copping a lot of criticism, and he directed some at pollies and also some at like the average Joe like us. He said something that I thought was actually pretty true. He said, as a society, we complain whether prices are going up or down. And that's very true of the housing market. So I'll give him a tick for that one.
Yeah.
And he also says, like, the economy is going well, right? The economy is growing. People are in work. People were able to save a lot of money during the pandemic. So he's like, give me a break.
Yeah.
But when he took aim at the pollies, he was talking about something that they've been a bit remiss with over recent years, and that's sort of the state of the budget. So we know that the budget has these structural problems where there's too much money going out, not enough coming in. And he's like, at some point, guys, you're going to have to either raise taxes, cut back on services, or do some kind of structural reform, maybe all three.
Yeah.
So he's kind of like, Australia, get ready, it's time for us to take our medicine, and that it's been consecutive governments over the best part of a decade that has not been willing to touch any of these levers.
Yeah.
So what's it going to be? Higher taxes, less childcare subsidies and stuff like that. Something's got to give.
Yeah, and someone's going to be complaining as well.
Yeah.
But we do have a budget coming up next month, which is super exciting for nerds like us.
Yeah.
It's kind of like a big royal event, but just for real massive nerds who love poring over documents.
We've done a
and
few of them
numbers.
together. Yeah, that's it. But look, Labor has indicated that this first budget of theirs will be one where it's really more about giving more stuff back to people rather than making any of those hard choices, like kind of giving more money to things like childcare and then fulfilling election promises. So this budget is likely only going to make these sorts of problems worse.
Yeah,
so.
you're not going to see that kind of structural reform come in from a government that's like, just landed and is trying to please everyone.
Not in its honeymoon period.
Yeah.
But I think at some point Aussies need to be aware that at some point they're going to have to look at this and it's probably going to hurt a little bit.
Yeah, we kind of keep learning that we've had it pretty good for a while, hey?
We have, Strap in.
Yeah.
Love hearing us analyse the biggest and smallest headlines each week. Make sure you follow us on the socials so you don't miss any content. We're all over the place. We're on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, TikTok and YouTube. Check us out. Liz, we have some good news. After months and months of horrific fighting in Ukraine has actually staged a massive fight back and reclaimed territory from the Russians and has actually driven the Russian enemy back over the border in the northeast region of the country. So it's been really great to see. Nice little ray of sunshine.
Yeah, and it kind of seems like it's crept up a little bit. This has all been happening while, there's been eyes on other big events going on in the world. So what's happened? What have they done?
Yeah, that's kind of why I wanted to highlight it, because I think the Queen has sucked oxygen out of a lot of the news agenda, and this has been going on. So it was the weekend before last that Ukraine mounted a counteroffensive, and it was kind of caught the Russians on the hop.
What we're looking at here is the map of what Ukraine has retaken, this section here, essentially an area twice the size of Greater London, really in the past week. So tell me, how did they do it?
Yeah, I mean, it's been a dramatic change and quite a surprise because everyone had been focusing on the south, down here, around the Kherson, where we've spoken before about the pressure Ukraine has been putting on here. And this, as it turns out, was a deliberate strategy to try and pull the Russians away from the north. And then the Ukrainians have found a gap in the Russian lines and they pushed in here very quickly. They've moved very fast. They've got behind the Russians and the Russian front has collapsed. And so this area now has turned back to Ukrainian control.
So the reporting that's trickled out seems to be that they got a bit of help from the West, the US specifically, and Australia included, certainly in terms of military hardware. And they've staged this counteroffensive in the northeast of the country. And according to Volodymyr Zelensky, reclaimed more than 6,000 square kilometres of territory in the east and the south of the country. So that's really encouraging. And hopefully this is sort of a bit of a reset for that war, which has been going on for much longer than anyone expected.
Yeah, and so it certainly seems like a bit of a triumph for Ukraine, but do we know sort of at this stage what it actually means for Russia?
Well, for one, it's an embarrassment for Russia on the
big
global
time.
stage. I mean, I'm not sure if you were living in Russia that you would know that because of the way the propaganda would go down to its people. But, you know, as the Ukrainian soldiers have been going back and looking at these towns and cities, there's been signs of like Russian cowardice, you know, them sort of, there's stories of them fleeing on stolen bicycles back over the border and them attempting to disguise themselves in civilian clothes. So I think that will give a lot of heart to the people who've been supporting Ukraine to see them sort of victoriously reclaiming these towns.
Yeah, changing course a little bit.
That's it. I mean, we don't know, like, you know, I'd caution people to think that this is a turning point because Russia will likely regroup and probably fire back with even more ferocity because they don't want to be embarrassed on the global stage, that's for sure. So, you know, we don't know whether this is enough to kind of turn the tide, but certainly I think it will give people a lot of heart and hopefully give the Ukrainians a bit of extra fighting spirit because they're on the front foot.
Yeah, it's encouraging. And then I've seen, you know, a few headlines kind of dripping in about some of the discoveries that have been made when the Ukrainians have kind of, you know, gone in and reclaimed some of this territory. What's been going on? Yeah,
so I mean, this is a good news story, but with it comes some pretty shocking details. So one of the things that came out is when they reclaimed some of this territory is they found what really looked like torture chambers. So sort of some basements where they've been keeping Ukrainian people, and that there were even reports from Zelensky of them finding like electric torture tools to sort of, you know, I guess they're trying to get information out of people and that kind of thing. So that's pretty shocking. They've also found some more mass graves, which is something that they've found repeatedly as they've returned to areas that the Russians have hit. So one quite shocking example is that they exhumed 146 bodies, mostly of civilians, in a mass burial site in eastern Ukraine, and also that among those bodies there were 2 children. So more evidence of Russia's pretty shocking callousness towards Ukraine's civilian population and what are really war crimes. So although this is good, there is a lot of heartache that comes with this story as well.
Yeah, and a good reminder that, you know, it's something that we kind of want to stay on top of as well.
That's right. And, you know, I think to give Flash a plug, I think if you're interested in this issue, Flash is a really good place to stay across it because, you know, oftentimes other stories come along and things like this can fall off the agenda. But, you know, because we have such a breadth of global news sources, they're really keeping a close eye on this, from the BBC to CNN to Al Jazeera and plenty of other news sources. You can still stay on top of this story because it remains one of the biggest global yarns.
Yeah. Good tip.
There
Good
you
plug.
There you go.
Well played.
Liz, we've come to the end of the podcast for another week. Thank you for your insights, especially on the Royals. It's been good to chat over it all.
Thank you. It's been fun.
And we'll get you back next week, of course. Until then, if you enjoy the news and this podcast and want to learn more about Flash, you can sign up at flashnews.com.au. Flash lets you stream more than 25 news channels in one place. New customers get 14 days free. Start your streaming today.